There is a specific kind of exhaustion that nobody talks about. It has nothing to do with sleep. It has nothing to do with work. It is the exhaustion that comes from spending your entire life performing for an audience that never asked for the show. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, and one of the things he observed quietly, but with devastating clarity, was this. Most people never actually live their own life. They live a version of it. A carefully edited, socially approved, endlessly adjusted version, designed not to express who they truly are, but to avoid the discomfort of being rejected by others. He had a name for this performance. He called it the persona. The persona is the mask, the social face we construct so early in life that most of us forget we ever put it on. The agreeable version of yourself, the version that laughs at the right moments, holds back the opinions that might offend, shrinks in the rooms where standing tall feels risky. The version built entirely around one silent question: will they still accept me if they see who I actually am? And the answer most people arrive at somewhere in childhood, somewhere in early rejection, somewhere in the look on someone's face when you were too much or not enough is probably not. So the mask goes on, and life begins flowing through it instead of through you. Jung wrote that the persona is, at its core, a compromise, a negotiation between who you are and who society is comfortable letting you be. On the surface, this seems harmless, necessary even. We all adapt to social situations. We all adjust our tone depending on who we are speaking to. That is not the problem. The problem is when the compromise never ends, when the negotiation becomes permanent. When you wake up one day and realize you have been so busy managing how others perceive you that you have completely lost track of what you actually think, what you actually want, what you actually believe without anyone else's approval attached to it. Jung considered this inflation of the persona one of the most psychologically dangerous conditions a person can quietly drift into, because the longer you live through the mask, the more the mask starts to feel like you. You become the calm one, the helpful one, the one who never causes problems, never asks for too much, never inconveniences the room. And people grow comfortable with that version. They begin depending on it, expecting it, rewarding it. And so the mask tightens. Here is what makes this truly disturbing. Approval is not inherently bad. Human beings are social creatures. We are wired to belong. Jung never argued that connection was the enemy. What he warned about was something far more specific. The moment seeking approval becomes your primary way of relating to your own existence. The moment you stop asking, "What do I think?" and only ask, "What will they think?" Because that shift, subtle as it feels in the beginning, is where the self begins to disappear. Jung pointed toward what he called internal validation, developing a sense of self rooted in self-awareness, rather than the shifting, unpredictable judgments of other people. And the reason this matters so deeply is that external approval is by its very nature unstable. It changes with the mood of the room. It changes with social trends. It changes the moment you stop being useful to someone's emotional needs. If your sense of worth is built entirely on how others react to you, your identity has no foundation of its own. It is rented, and the landlord can change the terms at any time. Jung described a process he called individuation, the slow, sometimes painful journey toward becoming who you actually are beneath all the social conditioning. Individuation, in his own words, means becoming a true individual, coming to selfhood, not performing selfhood for social validation, actually arriving at it. And the first obstacle standing on that path is always the persona, the mask you have spent years mistaking for your face. Jung wrote that the persona is fundamentally not real. It is a compromise between the individual and society as to what a person should appear to be. You take on a role, a function. You become this in one room and that in another. And somewhere in all the adapting, the actual you, the one with contradictions, with unpopular opinions, with needs that do not fit neatly into what others find convenient, gets buried beneath the performance. The troubling part is how invisible this process is while it is happening. Nobody tells you that you are disappearing. In fact, people often celebrate it. They praise your patience when that patience is actually suppressed resentment. They admire your easygoing nature when that ease is actually fear of conflict. They call you selfless when you are, more honestly, terrified of what happens if you ever put yourself first. Society rewards the performance, and so the performance continues. Jung observed that this need for external approval often traces back to something very old inside us. The terror of being cast out, of being seen clearly and found wanting, of the group withdrawing its acceptance. For early human beings, rejection from the group was genuinely dangerous. The nervous system learned to treat social disapproval as a form of threat. And so we developed elaborate psychological strategies to prevent it. Strategies so deeply wired that most people carry them into adulthood without ever questioning whether they still apply. They usually do not. Because what once protected a child in an unpredictable environment becomes a prison for an adult who no longer lives in that environment. The fear remains, the behavior remains, but the original threat is long gone, and yet you keep shrinking, keep softening your edges, keep editing yourself before you even open your mouth, not because the room actually demands it, but because somewhere deep in the nervous system, an old alarm is still running. Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is exactly what approval seeking does when it operates beneath the surface. You do not experience it as fear. You experience it as just being considerate, just being mature, just keeping the peace. But underneath the language, the mechanism is the same. Avoid disapproval at the cost of yourself. The cost accumulates quietly. You say yes when every part of you means no. You stay in conversations that drain you because leaving feels selfish. You present a version of your opinion that has already been softened enough to cause no friction, which means it is no longer really your opinion at all. And slowly, across years of this, something hollows out. You become very skilled at reading rooms and very unskilled at reading yourself. You become fluent in what others need and nearly illiterate in what you need. Jung warned that this is not a small personal inconvenience. He saw it as one of the central tragedies of modern psychological life. A person who has fully dissolved into the persona, who has so completely merged with their social mask that no separation remains, has, in a very real sense, stopped existing as an individual. They have become a function, a role, a mirror reflecting back whatever the room expects to see. And the deepest cruelty of it is this: the people around them often prefer it that way, because a person without firm boundaries, without an independent inner life, without the willingness to disappoint, is extraordinarily easy to be around. They do not challenge. They do not disrupt. They do not force anyone in the room to confront anything uncomfortable. They simply accommodate. And accommodation, over time, is mistaken for goodness, for maturity, for love. But Jung saw it differently. He saw it as a slow erasure. The privilege of a lifetime, he once wrote, is to become who you truly are, not who your parents needed you to be, not who your relationships conditioned you to remain, not who received the most social reward at the most vulnerable point in your development, who you actually are. And that becoming requires something most people find deeply uncomfortable: the willingness to be misunderstood, the willingness to disappoint, the willingness to let the room go quiet and stay in that silence without immediately rushing to fill it with whatever brings the approval back. Because the moment you stop managing other people's perception of you is the moment you begin discovering what is actually underneath it. And what Jung found in decades of working with human beings at their most honest is that underneath the performance, underneath the accommodation, underneath the exhausting effort to remain acceptable, there is almost always a person far more alive, far more complex, and far more worth knowing than the mask ever was. The tragedy is not that other people never saw that person. The tragedy is that you stopped seeing them yourself. That is what chronic approval seeking ultimately costs. Not just other people's respect, your own. Jung's entire framework of individuation pointed toward one quiet but radical idea: that the goal of a human life is not to be liked. It is not to be accepted by the largest possible number of people. It is to become, as fully and as honestly as possible, yourself. And that process, almost without exception, will make certain people uncomfortable. It will disrupt certain dynamics. It will end certain relationships that were only ever sustainable because you were willing to be less than what you are. But what grows in the space that opens up the relationships built on genuine recognition rather than managed performance? The self-respect that comes from no longer negotiating against your own instincts. The quiet that replaces the constant noise of seeking. That, Jung believed, is what a human life is actually for. So the question worth sitting with is not whether people approve of you. The question is whether you have any idea who you are when no one is watching. And maybe that is the most unsettling realization for many people. The answer to that question is silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind that feels like standing in a room you have lived in for years and suddenly not recognizing any of the furniture. Because when approval has been your compass for long enough, its absence does not feel like freedom. It feels like being lost. Jung understood this. He never pretended that individuation was comfortable. He said there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And he meant it literally, because the process of separating yourself from the persona, of peeling back the mask and sitting with what is underneath, requires you to grieve something. The version of yourself that kept everyone comfortable. The identity built around being needed, being liked, being the one who never caused problems. That version felt safe. It felt familiar. And letting it go feels at first like losing yourself entirely. But Jung's argument was the opposite. He believed that version was never truly you to begin with. It was a survival strategy that outlived its usefulness and quietly became a cage. And the moment you begin to feel that the tightness of it, the way it restricts you, the way it forces you to abandon your own instincts every time the room requires it, that moment is not a crisis. It is the beginning of something real. It is perhaps for the first time your actual life asking to be lived.